the old woman who was young again. Look, it all begins with a peasant who lived in a village lost in the mountains with his 3 daughters. The guy was not rich, but not poor either. He had his land, his rice field, and a humble house, where there was never a lack of food on the table. He worked from sun to sun, sweating the fat drop, but everything was worth it when he saw his green and healthy fields. Until one day, the misfortune came without warning. The water stopped running through the canals that irrigated his crops. First, it was as if the earth absorbed it little by little, and then, out of nowhere, the rice field began to dry up as if someone had stolen their lives. The peasant was alarmed. He scratched his head, frowned, and went out with his shovel to the shoulder to see what the hell was going on. He walked following the dry stream of water, his boots sinking in the dry mud, until he reached the mouth of the river. And there he saw her. It was a snake, but not just any snake. It was a huge beast, with thick scales like metal plates and eyes so cold that they looked like 2 dead moons. He had curled up just at the entrance of the water, blocking it completely with his heavy body. The peasant swallowed saliva. He was not a brave man, but not a coward either. He took off his hat, twisted it between his hands, and spoke with the quietest voice he could. "Mrs. Snake, please, I beg you, let me pass the water to my fields. My crops are dying." The snake did not even mutate. It only took out its bifid tongue and stayed there, looking at it, as if it were waiting for something else. The peasant did not know what to do. He passed his hand over his face, sighed, and returned home with his shoulders down. But he was not a man who gave up easily. The next day he returned, this time with a little more despair in his voice. "Snake, I beg you, my daughters and I depend on these fields. Without water, we will not have anything to eat." The snake did not move, and just when the peasant was about to give up, the creature spoke. "Give me one of your daughters as a wife, and the water will run again." The peasant felt that the ground was shaking under his feet. One of his daughters? How was he going to do something like that? But then he looked at his dry fields, imagined his daughters hungry, and his fear became despair. He closed his eyes tightly and said with tight heart, "If you keep your word, you will have one of my daughters." As soon as he said those words, the snake slid slowly, withdrawing from the entrance of the water, and as if he had been waiting for that moment. The water broke out with fury, filling the rice fields with its freshness. The peasant felt an immediate relief. But of course, joy never lasts long when you make a deal with something you do not understand. That same night, someone knocked on his door. Knock, knock, knock. It was a young man with pale skin and dark hair, dressed in fine clothes that did not seem to belong to that humble town. "I come for what you promised me," he said with a smile so calm that it was scary. The peasant felt that his soul was going to his feet. There was no doubt. That young man was the snake disguised. He did not know what to do. He did not know what to say. So he just closed the door gently, turned off the lamp and hid in his room, as if silence could make him disappear. But the young man did not move. He stayed there, waiting. The peasant, consumed by guilt, became sick with pure anguish. His daughters took care of him day and night, without understanding what was happening to him, until one day, already without strength, he called his eldest daughter. "Daughter, I need to tell you something." The girl sat next to him, worried. "What's up, father?" The peasant told her the whole story. The drought, the snake, the promise, and the arrival of the mysterious young man. "Tell me, daughter, would you marry him?" The young woman stood up from a jump, her eyes burning with fury. "What? How could you do something like that, father? I'm not going to marry a monster." Suddenly, he pushed the chair and left the room in a rage. The peasant sighed and called his second daughter. "Daughter, I must confess something terrible to you." But before his story ended, the girl was already red with rage. "Not crazy, I will marry that thing." She screamed and left, knocking on the door. Only the youngest of his daughters was left. She entered the room with a bowl of hot soup and sat down next to her father. "Father, you must eat something." "Daughter, I have to tell you something," he said with a broken voice. He told her everything, every detail, every fear. The girl kept silent. Then she took a deep breath and said calmly, "If you gave your word, then it must be fulfilled. I will go with the snake." The peasant looked at her with tears in his eyes. "I do not want you to suffer. Daughter, I will not suffer. Father, I only ask 3 things before I go. Whatever, daughter, whatever. I want 1,000 needles, 100 dried pumpkins, and cotton ribbons." The peasant did not understand, but he accepted and got everything he asked for. The next day, the snake returned in its human form, waiting for his girlfriend. The young woman, with her dowry in her hands, followed him without a single complaint. They walked for hours, crossing the forest, until they reached a swamp, dark and deep. "My home is at the bottom of this swamp," said the young man. He climbed on my back and closed his eyes. The young woman smiled and took out the dried pumpkins. "First, take my dowry to the bottom of the swamp." The snake, without suspecting anything, returned to its real form and jumped into the water. But the pumpkins were floating, and when he tried to sink them, the needles hidden inside were stuck in his body. He twisted in pain, getting entangled in his own agony, until with a last rustling, he became motionless. He had died. The young woman sighed relieved, but now she had another problem. She was alone, in the middle of a dark forest, and the night was about to fall. And this is where the story gets even crazier. The girl had managed to get rid of the snake with pure intelligence and cunning, but now she was alone in the middle of the thick forest, with the night falling like a dark curtain. The wind was blowing between the trees. The bushes were rustling, and who knows if they were just leaves or something else lurking in the darkness. The girl hugged her own body, feeling the cold biting her skin. "Well, now I'm in trouble," she murmured, looking around her. But as in good stories, when everything seems lost, a light appears in the distance. It was faint, trembling, as if it were the reflection of a candle in the window of a house. Without thinking twice, the young woman advanced towards it, stumbling with roots and branches, but without stopping. When she arrived, she saw a small shack of old wood and roofed with straw, bent as if time were crushing it little by little. The light came from an oil lamp in the window. She took a breath, raised her hand, and gently knocked on the door. Knock, knock, silence. The door opened slowly, and in the darkness, an old woman appeared completely wrinkled, with her back bent and a pair of small, lively eyes. "Who are you, and what are you looking for at my door at this time?" she asked with a voice that sounded old but full of energy. The girl put her hands together in a gesture of plea. "I'm lost. Please, can I spend the night here?" The old woman looked at her from top to bottom, frowned as if she were evaluating her, and then sighed. "Come in, girl, but make no noise." The house smelled of burnt wood and dry grass. There was a bed in a corner, a table with clay plates, and a stove with a pot that bubbled slowly. The old woman took a spoon, removed the contents, and served a little in a bowl. "Eat, you must be starving." The girl did not hesitate, and took the hot soup with both hands. It was delicious, although she could not recognize what she was carrying. "Thank you, Grandma. I don't know how I can pay you for this." The old woman smiled, but it was one of those mysterious smiles that reveal nothing. Life is curious, girl. Sometimes, when you help someone, you are actually helping yourself. After dinner, the young woman curled up in a corner, but sleep did not reach her. The old woman watched her in silence, as if she were deciding something. Finally, she got up and went to an old wooden chest at the bottom of the room. From there, she took out something strange. An old and wrinkled skin, like the skin of an old woman. "Listen well, girl," said the old woman, offering it to her. "This skin is a gift and a warning. If you use it, you will look like an old woman. No one will recognize you. No one will bother you. If you ever feel danger, put it on and you will be safe." The girl took it carefully, feeling its rough texture between her fingers. "Why are you giving me this?" The old woman looked at her. "Because the world is not always fair, girl. And sometimes the best way to win is not to fight." The next morning, the girl thanked the old woman for everything. She kept her skin and left. The road was long, but the girl remembered the words of the old woman and decided to put on her skin before continuing. As soon as she put on, she felt a strange tickling through her skin. When she looked at the reflection of a nearby stream, she took her hands to her mouth. It was an old woman. Her face was covered with deep wrinkles. Her hair had turned white, and her body bent as if it had aged for decades in an instant. She kept walking slowly until later she met a group of bandits. They were rough men with scars on their faces and torn clothes. They were gathered around a large bonfire, drinking and laughing with snarling. When they saw her, one of them closed his eyes. Who the hell is this old woman? The girl felt her heart beating hard, but kept calm. Only an old woman in search of a village where to spend my last days. The bandits looked at each other and laughed. Go, it's not worth it. Let her go. And so they let her pass without hurting her. When she finally reached the village, she looked for the house of the richest man in the place and knocked on the door. A servant opened the door with an expression of boredom. Who are you? I am a tired and homeless old woman. I can cook, clean, and heat water to bathe. Don't you need someone like that in this house? The servant looked at her from top to bottom and then said, We just need someone to do those tasks. Come in. And so the girl got a job at the house of the richest man in the village. During the day, she worked without rest. But at night, when everyone was sleeping, she took off her skin and became the young woman she was. In that free time, she sat in the attic to read, learning everything she could. What she didn't know was that someone was watching her. The son of the owner of the house, a young man with a good heart, saw a light in the attic one night and approached curiously. When he looked out, his breath stopped. There, in the light of the candle, was not the old woman who worked in the house, but a beautiful girl reading a book. From that night, the young man secretly returned to spy on her. Every time he saw her, his heart beat faster. He fell in love with that mysterious young woman without realizing it. But something strange happened. He began to get sick. He lost his appetite. He weakened and spent the days in bed. His alarmed father called all the doctors, but no one found a cure. Finally, a psychic was called to the house. His illness is not of the body, but of the soul, he said. He is in love with someone who lives in this house. The father, desperate, ordered all the women in the house to get ready and pass in front of the sun, but none of them managed to cheer him up. Then a servant murmured, Sir, only the old woman who heats the water is missing. The father frowned. Well, bring her. When the girl heard this, she secretly smiled. She went to her room, removed her skin, and fixed her hair. Then, dressed in her true appearance, she took the food to the sick man. As soon as the young man saw her, his face lit up, and, without hesitation, he took the food and began to eat. His illness disappeared as if by magic. The father, seeing what was happening, understood that the young woman was the cause of his son's happiness, and, full of joy, he organized a great wedding. Thus, the young woman, who once was engaged to a snake, found happiness in a way she never imagined. And they say that until the end of her days, she never stopped reading to the light of a candle, remembering that intelligence and courage can change any destiny.